have started a handful of software companies. I have a hardware company right now. I have raised venture capital and deployed somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $20 million worth of venture capital at Nebraska Global. We invested primarily in software, and our investment model was more like a design studio where we would come in and be the technical co-founders. Often I would be the business co-founder of the startup, so I worked for a handful of businesses there. EC3H and Beehive would be the two that I would reference. When I left, we raised $2.5 million of outside capital at a $15 million valuation. When I started, we had in the neighborhood of $5,000 in sales, and when I left, we had in the neighborhood of $1 million worth of sales. So that's a good example. I've done that with 3 or 4 other companies. Over the course of time, we've made investments, including in companies that have gotten into Techstars and Y Combinator. We've invested in some of Omaha's most exciting companies. We've invested in a bunch of UNO graduates. When you start to think about what that looks like now at the 3-year mark, our legacy actually looks pretty good so far, but now project that forward 10 years and you're talking about something that is really the only thing in the area that's going in at that stage, at that very early stage with $5,000, $10,000 checks. There really aren't other players in that space. So we're kind of important in the overall Omaha ecosystem. And I would say long-term, our goal would be to get our checks up a little bit and be a little bit more relevant. And I think that will happen as we play bigger roles with companies that are succeeding. So there's 2 answers. One, I like to teach, so that's pretty easy. The second answer is, my experience as somebody who was deploying capital suggested to me there just weren't very many people that knew how to do it. When I would talk to, academic financial folks, so either academics or financial folks, and I would talk to them about early stage investing, they would often have this blank look like, I don't know what you're talking about. So whether it was, how to set aside a certain amount of money for alternative investments in an individual angel or high net worth individual's portfolio, or it was, I kind of think maybe I have some people that'd be interested in being in an angel group. Even just knowing those words were missing. And so I think part of what we're doing is trying to populate the communities that our students end up going into with that early stage knowledge so that it isn't a foreign language and isn't something that is an oddity, but becomes kind of normal practice for people to think of, particularly high net worth individuals and wealthy, to think of the opportunity to help small businesses and early stage businesses wherever they live. So I think one of the strengths of the Maverick Venture Fund is it's very much experiential learning. So you learn by doing, which I think in business school is not always easy to do, particularly on the finance side. I think at best you're doing a small snapshot of what you might have to do in a commercial bank, venture capital organization, et cetera. Here you learn that there is both art and science, and inside of that it is doing it reveals a lot of the logic and common sense and just kind of way to think about problems more than it is, I have to have a checklist that does this, that, and the other thing. So what is a startup? So like we're looking at big, like $1 million companies, and it's like, no. You're looking at people that are taking calls from, their kitchen table or, working in the evenings. And that I think is really revealing, because I think a lot of times our students don't have a perception of what the businesses are that we conceive of as being big today were when they started. And I think it's really important to know that. I think it gives you a really good perspective. So I think every student would benefit, every business student, and a lot of students that are in liberal arts or in sciences would benefit from working at a startup, because you get your hands really dirty. They don't put you in the back room and say, go get me a cup of coffee. They're like, hey, we really actually need you to do work here because frankly, we don't know how to do half this stuff. And I think that's the reality of the startup world, that a lot of it is by the seat of their pants, et cetera. And so I think within that, if you said, how can students understand and get involved? I think there are a lot of companies that believe they're ready for venture capital. And I think few companies are. And I think understanding and being part of a company as it goes through that process is probably the best way to understand when and where and how venture capital can be helpful. Now, in terms of just like, how do I learn about venture capital outside of the Maverick Venture Fund? It's a super hard question. because honestly, there aren't a lot of places you can go to. It's not like you can go to a bank or to, a local fund and be like, oh, I got an internship. There are a couple spots, but it's like 2 or 3. One of the things we're trying to do is make sure we can create a pipeline at MVF to those 2 or 3 spots to make sure our students understand and meet those people early in the process and get an opportunity to potentially get an internship at Invest Nebraska or Dundee Venture Capital. Not because we don't want other students to have that opportunity, but just it is pretty prestigious. And even around the country, there aren't a lot of opportunities. I would say if you have the goal of going to live in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, there's probably a little bit more to it. Maybe in New York or Washington, D.C. or Boston, there's a little bit more chances. But it's hard as a student in Omaha, Nebraska to get the experience that MVF offers.